Okay, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the break and you enjoyed some of those updates that we had. Just wanted to add another late breaking update. Jones County Health Department in North Carolina just enrolled in the program standards also just yesterday or day before. So that didn't quite make it under the presentation. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Welcome back. I'm Donna Wanucha. I'm the third of the retail food specialists in the Southeast region. Our next session is a panel discussion about the food code, adoption experiences, and food code resources. Let me first begin with, there are many useful files associated with this session. So if you go to Pathable and you go to the top of the chat box, you'll see that there are several tabs. There's the chat box, the polls tab, the files tab, and the people tab. If you go to the files tab, there are many downloadable files from this session that you can take for your own. And of course, during this session, you're going to have some friends to reach out to if you have any questions as you go through your food adoption process. Also, there's the polling tab, which I would like for you to go to right now. And the question is, have you heard of the Retail Food Safety Regulatory Collaborative? Please vote now. Okay, while you're voting, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. I'm very pleased to introduce our team of excellent presentationers today, our panelists today, excuse me. We have Brenda Bacon, Quality Assurance from REHS Teeter, and also the past Conference for Food Protection Chair. We have Sandra Craig, the Director for the Division of Food and Lead Assessments at the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. And we have Shane Smith, Branch Head for the Division of Public Health Food Protection Branch at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Welcome. Let me remind everybody to please put any questions that you may have in the chat, and we'll have the speakers address those either live as time allows, or after the discussion, they will answer all of your questions afterwards. So don't feel like we're going to leave you with any questions unanswered. So let's see if we can see the results now. And Brenda, I'll turn it over to you as soon as we can see the results. Jessica?
Hey everyone. So I know if you're in Zoom, you can't see the results. So we have 56% who said yes and 44% who said no. Okay,
there you go, Brenda. All right, well,
Donna.
Let's get started.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. The sessions and the information that I have seen over the last few days has been awesome. It's tough to follow Dr. Dijak, I'll just tell you that right now. But I want to share a little bit about the collaborative, and for the 50 some odd % that has heard about it, hopefully you have gone to the website and poked around a bit and understood what kinds of information are there that may help you in various aspects of all things that the collaborative is doing. So Dr. Dijak earlier today provided some information about the participants in the collaborative, and there are 4 associations and then 2 federal agencies. And the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the National Association of County and City Health Officials, the National Environmental Health Association, the Conference for Food Protection, the Association of Food and Drug Officials are your, and the CDC are your participants in the collaborative. And together, these minds, if you will, are working to reduce the incidence of foodborne illness in the nation. Next slide, please.
Jessica, would you go ahead, please?
So the collaborative has a lot of focus on the adoption of the latest editions of the food code and promoting and improving the food safety cultures that will hopefully reduce in foodborne illness by increasing enrollment and active participation and conformance to the voluntary national retail food regulatory program standards. Improving foodborne illness outbreak investigations and improving food safety management systems at retail food facilities. We did listen to the session yesterday talking about food safety management systems and how it impacts scoring and unfavorable conditions in the retail establishments. Very good information yesterday. And it enhancing effective communications and sharing best practices among the retail food protection partners. So if you think about the members of the collaborative, it's the best minds in the business, if you will, sitting around together, talking about ways to improve food safety and reduce foodborne illnesses. And I was honored to be part of that group and still am. I was the vice chair of the Conference for Food Protection, and that's how I got involved with the collaborative. My term has ended as of August, but I am continuing my work with the collaborative. Next slide, please. So you might ask, what's the history? Well, in the fall of 2018, the FDA had this idea that if we pooled our resources and we pooled our knowledge with these associations leadership, that we could come up with solutions and ways to sort of infiltrate the systems that were at hand and move the needle to improve foodborne illness in the US. So in June of 2019, we had our first Retail Food Regulatory Association Summit in Maryland, and I was amazed at the people sitting around the table. So we spent 2.5 days brainstorming, talking about from each of our perspectives, how we could really collaborate together and come up with a vision, come up with lanes of work, come up with objectives. And then we determined in early 2020 that the CDC was not at the table and needed a place there. Next slide, please. So if you look at this map, this was new to the collaborative website site, and it is kind of what greets you on the first homepage and also on the toolkit page. And it talks about the food code and who has adopted which version across the US. And this map hopes to provide some information to the users. It's very interactive. You can click on the actual states and you can get information. The work group that developed the food code toolkit really wanted to find a way that users could go to one place, click around, get different information about certain aspects of food code adoption, such as what are the benefits, such as who's adopted which version. And we have testimonial by Sandra Craig, who's on this presentation. I thank her much. I hope that anyone that wants to provide a testimonial for food code adoption, we would be happy to hear that, and we can go into how you can do that a little bit later in the presentation. So with that, I will turn it back to Donna.
Thanks, Brenda. Next slide, please. All right, we'll be back with Brenda in just a few minutes. So now we're going to move on to a discussion of the food code adoption experience in North Carolina and South Carolina. So we have Sandra Craig here and Shane Smith to help us with that discussion. All right, so first we're going to talk about the food code adoption process. And Sandra, let's go to you first with this. Could you just summarize your regulatory oversight in South Carolina? How is your program set up?
Sure. Our program is a statewide program. There are no county health departments. We are all state agents. We all work for the state of South Carolina. And we have state statute that allows DHEC to promulgate regulations. Our statute does not allow us to do a straightforward adoption of food code, since food code is not a federal law.
Okay, thank you. And Shane, what is your regulatory oversight in North Carolina?
Hi, pretty much similar to Sandra's. We have to have legislative authority to adopt the newest version of the food code every time a new food code comes out, and that's under our general statute under 138 to 48. So what we do is we adopt by reference, and we do that once we get the legislative authority, and then we adopt it into our administrative code.
Okay, and do you adopt as a state, or is that a local health department responsibility?
Here in North Carolina, we are decentralized, so we adopt it as state rule, and then we have authorization process for our 100 counties and 87, which is 87 districts that carry out the inspection process and permitting on the local level.
Okay, so your programs are set up quite differently from each other in being
Sure.
centralized, both centralized and decentralized. Can you tell us now what version of the food code you guys are on now, and how many times have you gone through this adoption process? And Shane, would you start us off, please?
Sure. We are actually in the process, and tomorrow is our last meeting with the Rules Regulatory Authority to adopt the 2017 food code and the supplement. So this will be our second attempt version of adopting the food code. We adopted the 2009, which we kind of called the 2009 plus back in 2012. That was our first adoption and our first major upgrade to a food code here in North Carolina as the basis of our rules. We have to send our rules to the Public Health Commission first. So we've already made those 2 hurdles this year. This has been about a 2-year process. We were granted the legislative authority through session law in 2019 to adopt this version of the food code. And if all goes well, we'll have October 1st as our date to implement.
Okay, all right, hot off the press news then, great. And Sandra, how about you? How many times have you gone through this process?
Our regulations have been based on food code since about 1995, which I think it was actually called the Unicode back then.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had about a 20-year gap. We updated our regulation to be based on the 2013 code in 2014. And then we revised the regulation again in 2019 to reflect the current 2017 code. We do a notice of drafting, and then we draft a proposed regulation, and then we draft a final regulation. Both of those have to go through a process where they are approved by the DHEC board, and the final regulation has to have a public hearing. Once the final regulation is approved by the board, then it goes to the legislature and the governor for review and approval. They cannot change the wording of the proposed regulation. They can only approve or disapprove it. And that process to update the reg generally takes about a year to complete from when we start with the notice of drafting to getting final approval by the governor and the regulation and the legislature.
Okay, so it can be a rather long process for both of you.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Normally it takes about 18 months once we are given the authority for the Public Health Commission to adopt. It's about an 18-month to 24-month process here in North Carolina.
Okay. Now in FDA terms, you know, we have some forms in the back of the food code that talk about adoption using the long form versus the short form. So Sandra, can you explain to us, do you promulgate the food code into your actual rules that are then in your statutes, or do you just reference the food code?
We actually copy almost all the sections of the food code into our regulation without change. We don't put the annexes into the regulation, but we do keep our numbering the same. So we use the exact same format. We use the PPFs. It looks like food code when you read it in our regulation. Now we've added a chapter with our standard variances for things such as pet dining, outdoor cooking, wild mushroom harvesting, and other things like mobile units, temporary units, barbecue pit rooms. And Chapter 8, we've tweaked a good bit too.
Okay. And Shane, how does it work in North Carolina? Do you actually have the food code in the regulation in the 2600 rules, or is it addressed elsewhere?
It's adopted by reference into our 2600 code, our administrative code. So what we did, especially this time, it was a lot easier than the first heavy lift that we had in the state. I was still working in the local level at that time, so I wasn't a part of that process when we did that in 2012. So shout out to all the predecessors and our great people that were on staff at that time that did the heavy lift. So this time, of course, it was a little bit different. We adopted by reference, which I assume would be the short form according to the FTA framework. Into our 2600 rules. Just like Sandra, we have a lot of specific North Carolina rules for mobile food units, barbecue pit rooms, and of course, any legislative laws that have been passed that are reflected within our code, we incorporate those and update those at that time.
Okay, great. Now let's get to brass tacks. Now, every time that you change a rule, it affects money somehow. So usually that involves a fiscal impact statement of some sort. Shane, can you speak to that first as to what you've done in North Carolina?
Sure. Anything that is $1 million to the total sum of all partners, which would be, regulatory, industry, the local level, would have to require a fiscal note. And we send in a sample of our latest fiscal note. You'll see that as far as one of the links that you can look to. We do this on every rule that we have. We have to examine that with our legal system to make sure we're catching all those in between. We are very fortunate here that we get a pre-review through the Public Health Commission, through a rules revision to kind of send in once we have our work group, and we can talk about that here a little bit. But we incorporate what the fiscal impact will be to all partners, and that'll include training, your impact to industry, as well as to our rules itself.
Okay, and Sandra, do you have a similar process that you have to do?
We do in a way, because we incorporated fees into Chapter 8, we do have to do a physical impact statement in the board package that goes with the regulation, and it's reviewed by both the board and the legislature. Fortunately for us, it's a relatively broad statement of the need and reasonableness of that proposal. We don't really have to get down into the weeds and say, this dollar goes there. They obviously, when it's in the legislative committees, they may ask some specific questions, and we do have our talking points, our bullet points ready for them. So we can say, this is what it cost us to run the program. This is why we have these fees that partially support the program. It's not fully funded by fees. So there is that impact statement that's part of that process.
Okay, thanks. So that's another difference. And please note again that North Carolina's fiscal note is posted under the files at the tab above the chat. So if your jurisdiction has to go through that process, North Carolina may have done some of the work for you as far as the fiscal impact goes. All right, so kind of finishing up the whole process topic. You both have grading systems. So how did a new adoption affect your grading system? Did it affect it at all? What did you have to do?
Of course, when the 2017 adoption, we've had to redo our marking instructions and the inspection form. And our inspection form is specifically designed to help meet with the standards and Standard 6. So those had to be gone through. We had a great team that looked at our inspection form to make sure we had to reevaluate and, of course, include those new violations into our rules and into the inspection form itself to make sure it was still consistent with Standard 6. Over half of our state of North Carolina are enrolled in the standards. So we try to, and at all points in anything we do, to make sure we have that crosswalk there. So it did have to have a factor of redoing the inspection form and grade sheet. Okay. And Sandra?
We had to do the same thing when we first switched to our food code like adoption in 2014. We had to go through and rescore our inspection sheet so that we still came up to 100 because our grading system is based on 100. And then we put in a section in Chapter 8 that basically said what is an A, B, or C, but we honestly did not change it from our 95 version. And we just took that, put it in there and made the scoring in the now 52 item. Well, I think we're actually up to 56 items on our inspection sheet, total 100 somehow or another.
Okay, so to summarize, I think you both have inspection forms that meet the criteria of standard 3. And you also have graded forms, which is something that the food code form, the CFP form, does not have. There are no points associated with it. All right, so let's move on to successes and challenges in adoption. So first of all, let's go to what works. What worked for you, Sandra, in South Carolina for getting all your stakeholders on board with this? What did you guys do from start to finish?
Well, it's critical to get that support. We partnered with South Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association to hold our stakeholder meetings. They were fabulous. They came out there with us. We held joint meetings. We held them before we started drafting. We held them during when we were drafting. We held them after we had gone to the board for the first time. We held them again. We held as many as were necessary, particularly in 2014 when we were making that huge leap. We just were out on the road all the time. You were out there with us some of the time, Donna. We worked with the Convenience Store Association and the South Carolina Food Safety Task Force to get the message out through their newsletters, their meetings. We went to trade shows and talked about what we were doing. We had it on the website. We put it everywhere that we could, what we were revising and what the major changes were. That seemed to work very, very, very well for us both times.
Okay, so it's something you've continued for every version.
Yes.
Okay, and Shane, how about you? How did you get support? You're muted, Shane.
I apologize. I must have been unmuted and muted myself again. I would echo a lot of what Sandra said. We've really been fortunate in North Carolina to have some really good industry partners through our North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association, the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association. Anytime we do a rule adoption process, no matter what the rule is, we have to have a stakeholder group of all parties. That seems to help us as far as to get that on the front end when working through our work groups for our stakeholders, including academia, local regulatory, our county partners. You can't say enough about their participation in what we do. And of course, our staff here with DHHS, our regional staff. So doing that, we also have our Food Safety Advisory Council and also the Food Defense Task Force that we have worked through to help for the training aspect and just for getting the information out when new food codes are available and getting that support. This legislative authority was actually really pushed more by industry. We got a lot of support letters from our counties and from those associations saying how they, backed it, they wanted it to keep North Carolina current, to be on the cutting edge of the most current food code. And that does a lot when you're presenting a public health commission for your rules commission to show that you have the backing there. And of course, you do have public comment period and answering those public comments. But this last part that I have had a major process in, we were very limited on our public response because we were already out in front. So it made a huge difference.
Okay, so you're both talking to everybody, basically, to let them know this is coming. We want your input. We want to do this together. And I'm hearing the word partnering and collaboration over and over again. All right, so food code adoption often requires a lot of heavy lifting in regards to getting training done. How did you push out training for your staff and to operators? Shane, we'll let you go first.
Sure. First and foremost, we have regional meetings throughout our state. We hold those at least several times a year. We used to have them 4 times a year. We moved them back to 3. And even during the time of the pandemic, we've still continued our trainings through virtual trainings, even our centralized intern training that we do multiple times a year. We've continued that process through Microsoft Teams. And what we have basically done is build a format. We'll actually start these meetings as soon as we get the clearance tomorrow, knocking on some wood here on my desk, that we get adoption, that we will start those trainings for our state and regulatory staff to get the newest version, the newest market instruction, the inspection form. And our Food Defense Task Force has actually partnered with the North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association and our other industry partners to do a training for industry. And that'll be done through that task force. And we'll have that available. All of our information will be on our website. And then we can speak at any local meetings that we have. We've also had local FESAC meetings through our counties. We have supervisors associations that we've just done discussions on this before we've had adoption, to let them know what will be coming, how it will affect them. So trying to get out in front and getting that as much out as possible, and then giving the guidance of when it will take place and how it will impact the format of our grading system.
Okay. And Sandra, how did you get the training of operators as well as your staff?
We did essentially the same thing. We used blast email invites to get people and webpage notices to let the external folks know that we were going to have meetings, particularly after it passed. We would take that revision, go out and talk to them about the changes. And we mainly talked about the major changes and the implications on them on their daily operations of their retail food establishment. For our internal folks, again, just like North Carolina, we held staff training meetings. Some of those were the big statewide ones that everybody attended as a big group. And then after we would have that big group meeting in person when we could, fortunately we were through the process before COVID. We would also go out and have meetings in our regional offices to make sure that they were understanding what we had talked about at the statewide meeting. We updated our marking guide, and we provide our marking guide on our website for industry to use as well as our inspectors. We found that to be very useful for them to have a copy of what we are looking at when we, so they can do their own inspections. But again, it's just a matter of getting out there and talking to folks, providing as much information as you can through your website, blast emails, letting everybody know about the changes, and then being available to answer questions, having our inspectors be able to answer questions when they're out there in the field.
Okay, so you could say you're doing a lot of educating at the first time out.
Very much so.
It's similar here. We would have, and we'll have that in our marketing instructions as the first time out. Anything that is new, that's different from the previous food code, or our instructions would be out. It'll be out, of course, because we have in, out, NA, and O, but it'll be out with 0 points, and that'll be an education opportunity. And then of course you're building your framework for the next inspection as well.
Okay, great. All right, so let's move on to practical things. So let's say I'm an operator and here you come with more changes again. What I was doing was just fine. Sandra, how do you sell the Camaro? How do you sell the public health piece? And please explain what you mean by that.
Well, I don't know how many people have seen the first Transformer movie, where Bobby B is selling them the Camaro. And he says, the paint may be faded, but it's custom. That's the way you've got to approach selling that Camaro to them. You've got to be able to show them how what appears to be onerous on the surface has real value for them. Best example I can give you was in 2014, we raised the hot holding temperature from our old 130 to 135, and we dropped the cold holding from 45 down to 41. So to balance this out for industry, we gave them something. We gave them time as a public health measure, something we had never had before. So it was a trade-off. You've got to negotiate these things with folks. That's how you sell it to them. And you take it in baby steps too. You may not be able to give them the whole thing to start off with, but you get the stuff that's really important as quickly as you can.
Okay, thanks for that. And thanks for reminding us of where that came from. All right, and Shane, how did you sell the Camaro in North Carolina?
I'll be honest, it's the first time I've ever heard this term, so that's pretty cool. I learned something. Really, this code version, as we all know, is more industry friendly.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think we really have a lot of selling points that pretty much almost speaks for himself. Specifically, going into allowing that emergency operation aspect if having that plan approved on the local level. And then, of course, the variance tool that we have in North Carolina, and being able to use the new code to limit the requirement of some variances. So a lot of that, I think, is a big push for some of our local, especially some of our local chef run facilities that have those processes. So, and kind of like what Sandra said, we always have to sell public health, regardless, we are regulators. We're trying to keep our community safe, our state safe, but selling them on the importance of what the new built-in aspects will help them in times of operating and protect them as well. So, always being a continued salesman of public health is important. I think we can never lose sight of that.
Right. Great. Thank you both for that, because we all sell public health every day, and I think we all have science degrees. So it's a skill that we really have to learn and pick up as we go along. All right, so let's move on to challenges and how you're going to improve for next time. And I know, Shane, you are on the cusp of having this all done for this time through. But in hindsight, what would you have done differently this time?
This time, I don't want to jinx myself because we're right here tomorrow, but it's going really well, to be honest with you. I think compared to our first time where we had to use that, just like Sandra said, that big initial lift, we moved from what we had pre-food code to the first adoption. This time has been an easier lift. The main thing, any state that is going to look at this and trying to adopt food code, whatever version it may be, I can't tout enough working with your partners, working with your industry partners, your regulatory partners, your academia partners, getting them all on the same page, or at least trying to bring all those stakeholders together before it starts. So that way you can address any concerns. Of course, here in North Carolina, we can't adopt each version of the new food code when it's put out. We have to have a legislative authority. Before we got a legislative authority in 2019, we were trying to lobby ourselves for 2013 and the supplement at that time. Of course, we didn't get the support. 2017, we got the support. And it was actually, like I said, our industry partners did a great job, and our county regulators as well, with the support letters from their health directors and their board of health wanting the food code makes a huge difference. So anything that you can do on the front end rather than address it through the rule adoption is going to pay dividends for you, as far as making your adoption process smoother.
Okay, thanks, Shane. And Sandra, what will you do differently next time? Lesson learned.
I don't know that we would do anything particularly different next time, but again, it's all just a matter of making sure that the message that you're sending out there is what the need is. The reason why we are going forward with wanting to revise again with the next current code is basically because when we went out and did these stakeholder meetings with our external partners, they all agreed that please, let's stay current. Let's not wait 20 years to make the change. That's too hard on everybody. It's hard on us, it's hard on them. Smaller incremental changes are much more acceptable to the public, to the regulated industry, and it's you can mold it and meld it to what you need. There are things that we didn't adopt in this last one because we weren't ready to adopt them, and the next step, the next little baby step will be to maybe add on some more of that. Training was something that we didn't have before 2014. So when the 2017 code came out wanting a CFPM on each shift, we just weren't ready for that yet. Instead, we went with food handler certificate. Next time, we hope to step up a little bit higher.
All right, thanks for sharing that, both of you. All right, well, let's go back to Brenda now and see what the collaborative has in their toolkit for jurisdictions to help them move forward with their food code adoption. Brenda?
Okay, so as you've just heard, we have two states, both Carolinas, and they are not the same in adopting the latest version of the food code or even a more recent version. So keeping that in mind and understanding that there are many ways to get to food code adoption, it would have been wonderful had we created a check sheet and, you know, it's a template. You could take it and go 1, 2, 3, 4, skip 5, go to 8. That just wasn't possible because of the different ways that certain jurisdictions would have to adopt the food code. So with that being said, if you'll go to the next slide, the toolkit was really established to help everyone get the information that they would need to compile and move forward and share with the appropriate people. May it be the legislatures, it could be the industry, it could be their regulatory partners. So this is a toolkit that you might come back and say, well, what about this? Did you guys think about this? And if you have an idea of something to include in the toolkit, there's a place that you can add your comments to, and that will be filtered through to the work group. So feel free to poke around on this webpage and click on the links, and hopefully it will help you with providing things such as resources, regular research papers, the matrix about who's adopted which version. And you know, you can knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, you had to go through this legislative procedure to get the food code adopted. Can you give me tips, tricks, things like that? So there's a lot of things on here that you can access and should help you in formulating a plan to move forward with adoption of a more recent version. Next slide. One of the things that's important, at least to us, and the work group discussed this at length, is the statements of support and the policy statements. And some of those can be used to garner support in your state or your jurisdiction for food code adoption. We have posted them all on the webpage. We continue to get them in. If you want to provide a policy statement, if you're an organization, or a letter of support, we will gladly take it and we will add it to this webpage. Also, Sandra had provided a testimony for us, and it's also on the webpage. Anybody that wants to provide a testimony, I would greatly appreciate that. You can forward it to the webpage or myself, and we'll make sure we get it in here. There are the benefits of the food code adoption, and you can go into the letters of support and see what folks have to say about that. Next slide. So the testimony on here, Sandra's quote that she has shared with everybody on the webpage, and to her point and to Shane's point, having industry involvement and support, I think, did help. We're all partners in this, and from an industry perspective, I can say that we were engaged with our health departments and our regulatory authorities in fostering the idea that a recent food code adoption makes our job easier, because we do work over different states and having to really keep up with what one state has adopted and another state has adopted, and having those differences operationally sometimes proves difficult. So we really like to play on a level field, and the food code allows us to do that as an industry member. So there's a lot of reasons why we, meaning regulatory and industry, support more recent food code adoption, because it does give us the opportunity to use the latest science, the latest version, and we can standardize to that. Next slide, please. So how can you help? You can help by submitting feedback on the collaborative webpage. You can help by providing an idea that we may not have thought of. Like I said, we've had questions come back in the past about, oh, we just need a check sheet. Well, it isn't that easy. And we've tried to include all the resources, or many of the resources, that you would need to move forward with food code adoption in your jurisdiction. One of the things that we have done is we created a survey and we put it out in the middle of COVID. So understanding that you send it out to many jurisdictions and you end up having a 22% return on the responses, which is not so bad considering how we all had to realign during COVID. We had surveys that included how long did it take you to adopt the food code. The most common time period was 12 to 24 months. 40% of the respondents indicated 12 to 24 months. There was 6% that said immediate. 1 to 6 months was 19%, 6 to 12 months was 12% or 21%. So this information is found in the survey results. The most recent food code, 34% of the respondents indicated the 2019 version. And it really goes all the way back to 1999. So obviously that's a long time ago. The adoption process, Sandra and Shane talked about how they can adopt the food code and how they may not. So we did a survey question that said adopt by reference. 26% of the respondents said that they could adopt by reference. 11% indicated it would be a statutory change, and 63% said that it would be modified through rules and regulations. We asked a series of open-ended questions about how they would implement the food code and what was their role in the food code. A lot of the comments did come back to having industry support and then providing stakeholders with the science behind the regulations. Kind of gets back to Sandra's comment about the car in Transformers, which I watch all the time because my husband seems to think it's a great movie 50 times later. So please take an opportunity to go and poke around on the webpage and provide feedback. Again, if you want to provide a letter of support or a testimony, feel free to do so. We're open to that. The Food Code Adoption Toolkit is a living website as we proceed down the path of reissuing the survey that we sent out in 2019. That's one of the intent is to upgrade it and to resend it once the COVID pandemic sort of calms down just a little bit. And folks can really have time to go on the Collaborative's webpage to look at the toolkit items, the tools in the toolkit, if you will, and really see if they're beneficial to them or not. Next slide. So thank you for the opportunity. The webpage that you can visit is www.retailfoodsafetycollaborative.org. And if you need or desire to contact us, the contact information is listed there and it is on the website. And we would appreciate any feedback. We would appreciate any support that you would have. Any suggestions will be considered through the work group. And I thank you for the opportunity today.
Thanks, Brenda. And I just want to get everyone's attention over to the chat that Crystal has posted the collaborative website in the chat. So if you want to go there directly and bookmark that, that might be a useful resource for you to use as you go along in your food code adoption journey. Right now, let's go to the next slide, and we're going to open it up to all of our panelists and everyone, all the participants, if you would please post any of your questions in the chat right now. We're going to move on to final words from our panelists. So moving forward from here, what are your take homes for folks that are looking at adopting a new version of the food code? And Shane, we'll go to you first. Give us some last words of how you move forward from here.
As far as we as our state or tips for states looking to adopt the food code?
Do some both.
Okay. Well, from here, we will speak tomorrow, or hopefully not even have to speak, the Rules Review Commission. So hopefully that'll be our adoption process, and we will move forward with the implementation on October 1st. What I would say as far as for states that are looking forward to this, kind of like what we've all echoed, the quicker you can to try to keep it as current as you can, the smaller the lift. If you have a big gap, it's going to be a larger impact to all, and that's industry, your stakeholders in academia trying to teach the process at your universities, because we do have a lot of affiliated universities in the state of North Carolina that keep hopefully us full of applicants and teaching our process, but also the regulators at large, making sure we are current with that and we're on the same page with what the newest food code is. When you're dealing with industry that comes in from all across the nation and the world, having that one uniform code and being all on the same page is a big help. It makes a big difference when you're not varying between different rules and regulations. So I would say trying to make that possible and working with your stakeholders to, whether you have to have legislative authority or not, to making sure that you have the support to do so.
Thanks, Shane. And you, Sandra, where can we go from here?
Well, and we're the same way. We'll be looking at I believe the next full version of food code is going to be the 2023 version, if I remember right.
Yes.
So when that one comes out, we're going to be revising, hopefully, our regulation again to be up to date with it. But I do think Shane's right. If you're making that huge, heavy lift, that first time lift, remember that you need to negotiate, use every tool in the toolbox. We found delayed implementation to be very useful. We delayed implementation on those very tough items for 2 years, which gave us time to go out there and educate industry about how to handle those big changes in temperatures in particular, and having to have a CFPM. It gave them time to get it. Half of them didn't, but at least they'd been told for 2 years that they had to have it. So it wasn't a big surprise when they started getting marked for it after 2 years. But the other thing is we find those champions. Find that, and your champions, yes, we love having those letters of support from the chain retail facilities, but the people that spoke best for us to our legislators were our local mom and pop guys. I had one chef from Greenville that came and spoke elegantly to the subcommittee. He one of our small chains, it's a 20-store chain in South Carolina. The president of that company spoke for us. He talked, and that was to get fees raised. And getting fees raised just doesn't happen normally, but they sold it for us. So these are the people that you really need to make friends. You need to make lots of friends. Everybody's your friend when you're trying to get food code passed.
Thanks, Sandra. And Brenda, do you have any last words for moving forward, maybe from an industry standpoint?
I think one of the things from an industry perspective is really understanding and working with your regulators to ask the right questions when new versions of the food code are adopted, and to understand that we all are here to protect the public. We're first line, last stop for food items before they go to our family and our friends and our neighbors. And we certainly want to protect those folks that shop in our stores or eat in our kitchens, and really understanding that the food code, the fundamental part of the food code, has gotten to where it is today because of the hard work of many, many, many people over the decades through CFP and really trusting the science and trusting our regulators and working and partnering with them to help public safety and improve foodborne illness and reduce it across the country. Truly, it's a magical process to get a new version of a food code, and it's countless and countless hours to get it there. So, and it's not for the faint of heart, if you will. It's there because we do want to protect the public, and we do want to work together with our regulators to do that.
Right. Thanks, Brenda. That really ties a bow on our whole presentation here is to remind everybody as to why we're here to begin with, is to protect the public health. And I've seen several comments from industry that they are an important stakeholder also. And I think we've learned over the years that we are all involved in retail food safety. It's not just the health department, it's industry, it's consumers through our food safety advisory councils, and it's everybody. So it takes a village was one of the comments. And I think we've learned it does. It's a heavy lift, but it's worth it to remember our mission of protecting public health. And that's for both industry as well as regulators. All right, well, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So I'm gonna say thank you so much to our panelists today, Brenda Bacon, Shane Smith, and Sandra Craig. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your experiences and being very honest and transparent about struggles and moving forward. And please remember that all of their information has been shared underneath the files tab. Please feel free to reach out to them. Their contact information is here. As we say in the South, everybody shares their stuff here in the Southeast region. So we're all sharing our stuff per usual, even though we aren't face to face. Okay, well, with that, I will turn it back over to Dan.